Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Good evening. Tonight we descend into the Pacific Northwest's deepest shadows, where ancient rainforests swallow light and sound alike. The Hoh Rainforest, 300 square miles of primordial wilderness where cedar and spruce rise like cathedral pillars through perpetual mist. What follows has been reconstructed from official National Park Service incident reports, ranger body camera footage, and psychiatric evaluations sealed by federal order. These are not campfire tales. These are documented encounters with something that walks between the trees. Something that knows your voice before you speak. Something that has been waiting in the moss-draped corridors since long before we gave these mountains names. The archives don't lie. They only reveal what we've tried to forget. Subscribe to Horror Night Whispers and join us as we unearth what the forest keeps buried. March 14th, 2019. The incident report filed by Ranger Lisa Mendez began with standard protocol notation: abandoned campsite, single occupant. No signs of struggle. What it didn't mention, what couldn't be reduced to checkbox documentation, was the wrongness she felt. The moment she stepped into that clearing 3 miles past the last marked trail in the Hoh Rainforest's interior corridor. The kind of wrongness that lives in your spine before your brain catches up. The campsite belonged to David Corman, 32, experienced backcountry hiker from Tacoma. His permit indicated a 4-day solo trek through the valley's deepest sections, where the canopy grows so dense that GPS signals fracture and compasses spin lazy circles. Mendez had found his site just after dawn, summoned by an automated alert when Corman failed to check in at the Glacier Creek checkpoint. She'd expected the usual scenarios: injury, equipment failure, maybe a stubborn hiker who'd pushed past his scheduled exit time. She hadn't expected what she found. The tent stood perfectly intact in a small clearing ringed by massive Douglas firs, whose lowest branches began 40 feet overhead. Moss hung from everything like frozen waterfalls of green and gray. The tent's entrance remained sealed from the inside, zipper pull dangling on the interior side. Through the translucent fabric, Mendez could see the shape of Corman's sleeping bag, still holding the impression of a body, though no one lay within. She called his name. The forest swallowed her voice completely. No echo, no reverberation, just immediate silence, as if the sound had been absorbed by the very air. She unzipped the tent. The sleeping bag was warm to the touch. A battery lantern glowed dimly on the tent floor. Corman's wallet, keys, and cell phone sat arranged in a neat line on his camping pillow. Everything suggested he'd left within the last hour. Maybe less. But it was the boots that stopped her. They sat outside the tent entrance, placed with deliberate precision, laces tied, positioned side by side. They faced the clearing's eastern edge, pointing directly at a wall of moss-covered deadfall where the forest became impenetrably dark. The positioning was too exact, too purposeful. Mendez photographed them according to protocol, noting in her recorder that the boots appeared to have been removed and positioned after the tent had been sealed from inside, an impossibility that made her jaw tight. She found the day pack 30 feet into the undergrowth, following a line that began at the boots and led straight into the densest section of old growth. The pack lay open, contents scattered as if someone had been searching for something specific while walking. A water bottle here, trail mix there, all in a deliberate trail leading deeper. Mendez keyed her radio to report the situation. Static answered. The radio worked. She could hear the carrier wave hiss, but no signal penetrated the canopy. Standard protocol dictated she mark the area and return for backup. But something in the arrangement of that scattered gear, the surgical precision of those facing boots, made her continue forward. The forest changed as she moved deeper. The Douglas firs gave way to massive western red cedars, some over 1,000 years old, their trunks wider than her ranger vehicle. Moss carpeted everything: the ground, the fallen logs, the standing deadwood. The silence intensified until she could hear her own pulse in her ears. No bird calls, no wind rustling through the canopy, No insects, just her breathing and the soft compression of moss under her boots. She'd worked these mountains for 7 years and had never experienced such complete absence of sound. The forest felt like a held breath. She checked her watch. 9:43 a.m., but the light seemed wrong for mid-morning, diffused to a submarine grayness that made distance impossible to judge. The temperature had dropped noticeably despite the forecast calling for seasonal warmth. Her breath misted in front of her face. In March, in the valley, the trail of scattered gear continued for nearly 3 miles by her GPS reading, though the device's accuracy seemed questionable as the distance markers jumped erratically. She found Corman's compass hanging from a low branch, its needle spinning in slow, continuous circles. His knife lay embedded in a cedar trunk at shoulder height, driven in to the hilt. She photographed everything, her training overriding the mounting dread that pressed against her chest like a physical weight. Then she saw him. David Corman stood approximately 40 yards ahead, positioned before a massive cedar that had to be 15 feet in diameter. The tree was ancient and dying, its bark sloughing off in great sheets, heartwood exposed and black with rot. Corman faced the tree, his back to Mendez, absolutely motionless. He wore his hiking clothes but no jacket despite the cold. His arms hung at his sides. He didn't move, didn't shift weight, didn't react to her approach at all. David Corman? Her voice sounded flat, dead in the oppressive quiet. He didn't respond. Mendez advanced slowly, hand instinctively moving to her radio, though she knew it wouldn't work. 20 yards. 15. She could see his shoulders rise and fall with breathing, the only indication he was alive. 10 yards. She called his name again, louder. Nothing. She circled slightly to get a better angle, trying to see his face. That's when she noticed the moss behind him. The wall of moss covering the cedar's base showed dozens of handprints pressed deep into the green growth. Adult-sized hands, fingers splayed, all positioned at various heights, as if a crowd had been reaching towards something or trying to hold something back. The prints were fresh. She could see where the moss had been compressed recently, the exposed bark still damp and dark. They formed a pattern around where Corman stood, concentrating in the space directly behind him. "Mr. Corman, I'm Ranger Mendez. I need you to turn around slowly." He turned. The movement was mechanical. Joints, stiff, head rotating first, then shoulders following. When he faced her, Mendez felt her stomach drop. His eyes were open but completely unfocused. Pupils dilated so wide they appeared entirely black, swallowing the iris. His skin had gone pale, lips slightly blue. He stared through her rather than at her. And for a long moment, he didn't blink. Then he spoke, voice barely above a whisper. Words slurred slightly as if his tongue had gone numb. "It's been walking beside me since dawn." "What has?" "Mr. Corman, are you injured?" His eyes didn't focus. He continued as if she hadn't spoken, each word carefully formed, but empty of inflection. "Matching my pace. I'd stop. It would stop. I'd start walking. It would start. Breathing when I breathed. Exhaling when I exhaled." Mendez moved closer, searching for signs of injury or hypothermia. His hands showed no cuts or scrapes, no blood, no visible trauma. But his pupils remained fixed in that terrible dilation, and his breathing came too slow, too measured. "What was walking with you, David?" It wore his voice. His lips barely moved. "My brother's voice. Michael died 4 years ago, drowned, but I heard him calling my name. Behind me, always behind me. When I'd turn around, nothing. Just trees, just moss." But his voice kept coming, getting closer. The temperature dropped further. Mendez could see her breath now in thick clouds. The forest pressed in around them, the silence becoming almost painful, a pressure in her ears. She reached for her radio again, knowing it wouldn't work but needing the familiar motion. That's when she saw the moss. The handprints she'd noticed earlier seemed to have multiplied. More of them now, spreading across the cedar's trunk, moving up the rotting bark in a pattern that suggested climbing or reaching. And they were wet, fresh, as if they'd been pressed into the moss within the last few minutes. But no one had moved. She'd been watching Corman the entire time. "We need to leave this area, Mr. Corman. Right now." His gaze finally shifted, focusing on something past her left shoulder. His mouth moved, forming words that came out in that same dead monotone. "It's still here." Mendez spun. The forest behind her looked identical to how it had moments before, moss-draped trunks, hanging lichen, shadowless gray light. Nothing moved, but as she watched, she heard it. Footsteps, not boots on soil, bare feet on wet earth, the soft percussion of skin on moss, circling them, first from the left, then behind, then to the right. Slow, deliberate steps that matched no visible movement in the undergrowth. Her body camera's audio would later capture what happened next with forensic clarity. The footsteps continued their circuit, perhaps 20 feet away, maintaining perfect distance. One set became 2, then 3, then more, all moving in synchronized rhythm around their position. The breathing started shortly after deep inhalations and long exhalations that didn't match the footstep rhythm, overlapping in impossible ways, coming from multiple directions simultaneously. Human breathing, close enough that she could hear the moisture in it, the slight rasp of air through throats. But nothing visible moved. Mendez pulled her sidearm, training overriding terror. She swept the perimeter, looking for targets that didn't exist. The footsteps continued. Unbothered, Corman remained motionless, still staring at that point past her shoulder. "Who's there?" Her voice cracked. "Identify yourself. This is federal land." The breathing intensified. A dozen sources now, maybe more, surrounding them in a perfect circle. She could feel them there, presence without form, intelligence without body. The moss at her feet showed new impressions, appearing footprints manifesting in real time, bare feet pressing into the green growth, leaving temporary depressions that slowly filled back in. The prints walked past her, around her, between her and Corman, but nothing corporeal made them. Her camera recorded it all. 17 minutes of audio and visual documentation that would later be classified and sealed. 17 minutes of circling footsteps and synchronized breathing. 17 minutes of Corman standing immobile while Mendez backed against the rotting cedar, weapon drawn, watching prints appear in the moss with no feet to make them. The prints led everywhere and nowhere. They converged on the cedar, overlapping on the trunk, climbing up the bark in impossible vertical progressions. They surrounded Corman in concentric rings. They passed within inches of Mendez's boots, and she swore she felt the displacement of air as something invisible moved past her face. "We're leaving. Now." She grabbed Corman's arm. His skin felt cold, muscle rigid. He allowed himself to be pulled but moved like a sleepwalker, joints stiff, feet dragging. The breathing followed them as they retreated, maintaining that perfect circular distance. The footsteps paced them, matching their speed exactly. When Mendez stopped to check her GPS, the breathing stopped. When she started moving again, it resumed. It took 90 minutes to reach the trailhead. The entire journey, the dire, the footsteps circled them. The breathing never ceased. Corman walked mechanically, eyes unfocused, occasionally whispering coordinates. 47.8634 north, 123.9276 west. The same numbers, over and over, barely audible. Park emergency services met them at the ranger station. Corman was transported to Olympic Medical Center in Port Angeles, where he underwent comprehensive evaluation. The psychiatric report noted acute catatonic symptoms, unresponsive to stimulus, repetitive speech patterns. He never regained coherent communication. To this day, in the secured care facility where he resides, he continues whispering those coordinates, the same numbers he spoke in the forest, speaking to something only he can see. The coordinates he repeated led investigators to a remote section of the Hoh Valley, 3 miles from where Mendez found him. Ground-penetrating radar revealed what historical records had erased unmarked graves, 11 of them, dating to approximately 1943. Further archive research uncovered a logging camp that operated in that area during World War II, abruptly abandoned after several workers vanished. Company records listed the men as deserters. Their bodies were never found, until the radar identified them, exactly where Corman's broken mind had directed. Mendez's body camera footage remains classified. The official incident report cited acute psychological episode induced by environmental exposure, but the audio analysis revealed something the official narrative couldn't explain. During those 17 minutes of circling footsteps, the breathing captured on the recording showed intervals that don't match human lung capacity exhalations, lasting 47 seconds without corresponding inhalations, multiple breathing patterns, overlapping in ways that suggest more than a dozen sources in that small clearing. And beneath it all, barely audible even on enhanced playback, voices speaking in unison, forming words in a language that predates the English names we gave to those mountains. The whole rainforest continues to grow, moss covering everything, silence swallowing sound. Rangers who work the interior corridors report areas where GPS fails, where compasses spin, where the temperature drops without reason. They avoid certain sections, especially near the old cedar with the rotting heart. The moss there shows handprints that won't fade, pressed into the green growth like memories the forest refuses to forget. David Corman's tent remains in evidence storage. His boots, the ones found perfectly aligned, facing the moss wall. The laces are still tied. No one has examined them closely enough to notice what Mendez saw in her final report. The detail that made her request permanent reassignment to coastal patrols. The tread patterns on the boot soles contained traces of ash and charcoal. Chemical analysis dated the particulate matter to approximately 1943. The same year the logging camp vanished, the same year the men were buried in graves that wouldn't be found for 76 years. The boots had walked through fire that burned 8 decades before Corman was born. The forest keeps its secrets. And sometimes, when the mist grows thick and the canopy blocks all light, those secrets walk beside us, wearing familiar voices, breathing in rhythm with our steps, waiting to show us what lies beneath the moss. The archives thicken. What follows was recovered from Washington State Patrol. Evidence files, sealed, disputed, and never fully explained. The Quinault Rainforest sprawls across the western Olympic Peninsula like a living cathedral, its canopy so dense that even midday light filters through in shades of green-gray twilight. In November 2020, 3 experienced hikers, Sarah Chen, Marcus Webb, and Joel Pritchard, entered this primordial wilderness on what should have been a routine 4-day loop trail. They carried modern equipment, filed proper permits, activated GPS tracking. They followed protocol. The forest had other plans. According to Washington State Patrol Report number 2020QR1147, their last known position transmitted at 9:23 p.m. on day 1. Mile marker 7. Elevation 847 feet. Coordinates fixed. Then nothing. Just the silent black of a signal that stopped mid-breath. What search teams discovered 3 days later would challenge every rational explanation, every comfortable assumption about the boundary between the natural world and something older, something that remembers when these trees were young. Sarah Chen checked her GPS one final time before the November dusk swallowed the trailhead. The device glowed steady green signal strong, battery full, route downloaded. Beside her, Marcus Webb adjusted his pack straps with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this 100 times before. Joel Pritchard studied the trail map, his headlamp casting sharp shadows across the paper's topographic lines. Mile marker 7 by nightfall, Joel said, his breath misted in the cooling air. Established campsite. Water source confirmed. They'd hiked together for 6 years. The Quinault Loop was modest by their standards, 31 miles. Minimal elevation gain, well-maintained trail. A November trip to cap off the season before winter locked the high country away. The ranger at the permit station had been friendly, professional. No warnings. No unusual wildlife activity. Just standard bear protocol, and a reminder to filter all water. The forest closed around them as they walked, Douglas firs rising like columns in a temple older than memory. Moss hung from branches in curtains of impossible green. Their boots found easy rhythm on the packed earth, and the only sounds were their breathing, the creek's distant murmur, and the occasional bird call echoing through the canopy's cathedral silence. Sarah led. She'd planned the route, marked the camps, calculated the mileage. Her satellite communicator blinked its steady heartbeat on her pack strap, connected, monitored, safe. They passed mile marker 3 as the light began to fail, the forest dimming from green to gray to something deeper. "Good pace," Marcus said. His voice seemed too loud, then too quiet, swallowed by the moss and the pressing stillness. "Should make camp with an hour of light to spare." The GPS showed their blue dot creeping steadily westward along the mapped trail. Everything was exactly as it should be. The forest had not yet shown them what it truly was. They reached mile marker 7 at 8:47 p.m., exactly on schedule. The established campsite sat in a small clearing where the canopy broke just enough to reveal a patch of starless sky, heavy with November clouds. Joel dropped his pack and pulled out the water filter, while Marcus began clearing the fire pit of old ash. Sarah checked the GPS. The device showed their position precisely, latitude 47.5891, longitude -123.8734. She pressed the beacon button to transmit their location to the monitoring service. The message sent. Confirmed received. Everything standard. But as she set up her tent, something caught her peripheral vision. A flash of red between the trees, perhaps 50 yards north. She straightened, stared into the darkening forest. Nothing moved, probably just a backpacker's tarp or a piece of surveyor's tape. The Olympic forests were crisscrossed with trail markers. "You see that?" she asked. Marcus looked up from the fire pit. "See what?" "Red. Something red. Over there." She pointed, but the darkness had thickened, and now she wasn't even sure which direction she meant. "Deer hunter, maybe," Joel said, though his voice carried uncertainty. Hunting season had ended weeks ago. Everyone knew that. They finished setting camp in silence that felt heavier than before. The fire caught quickly, good dry wood, properly arranged, but its warmth seemed to stop at an invisible barrier 3 feet from the flames. Beyond that, the cold pressed in with almost physical weight. Sarah pulled out her journal, a habit from every trip. She documented the day, mileage, terrain, weather conditions. She recorded the time 9:15 p.m. and noted that all systems showed green. But when she tried to write about the red flash, her hand hesitated. Something about describing it made it more real, more present. And she found she didn't want to give it that power. Marcus cooked dinner on his compact stove. Freeze-dried stroganoff, rehydrated and steaming. They ate in their familiar pattern, passing the pot, making the small jokes that years of friendship had polished smooth. But the jokes fell flat tonight. The forest absorbed them, gave nothing back. "Anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Joel said it like a joke, but nobody laughed. The GPS still showed their blue dot at mile marker 7. Still transmitting, still connected, still lying. At 11:30 p.m., Sarah woke to footsteps. Not animal footsteps, not the soft pad of deer or the heavy shuffle of bear. These were measured, deliberate, human-paced. They circled the camp at a fixed distance, perhaps 20 yards out, moving through undergrowth that should have crackled and snapped, but produced only whisper-soft friction against fabric. She lay rigid in her sleeping bag, listening. The footsteps passed behind her tent, past Joel's tent, past Marcus's tent, continued in their slow circuit, around and around. "You guys awake?" Marcus's voice was barely audible. "Yeah," Sarah breathed. "Hearing it too?" "Yeah." The footsteps continued. Whatever walked out there maintained perfect rhythm, perfect distance. Around and around and around. Joel's tent rustled. "Should we check?" "With what light?" Marcus asked. "Fire's dead, and I'm not turning on my headlamp to show whatever that is exactly where we are." The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. Sarah's heart hammered so hard, She could feel it in her throat. She reached for her GPS, still transmitting, still showing their position fixed at mile marker 7. The time read 11:47 p.m. Then, soft and clear in the absolute dark, someone hummed. A woman's voice. A lullaby Sarah had heard before, though she couldn't remember where. The melody was simple, childlike, and it came from directly outside the tent circle, between Joel and Marcus. The humming circled them once, twice, 3 times. With each pass, Sarah remembered more her mother singing it when she was very small, before the divorce, before everything changed. How could she have forgotten this song? The humming stopped at exactly 3:47 a.m. Sarah saw the time on her GPS screen, the blue glow harsh against the darkness. She saw something else too, a shadow passing between her tent and Joel's, backlit by starlight that shouldn't have reached the forest floor. The shadow wore something that moved like a coat, something red. When she finally found courage to unzip her tent at first light, she found Marcus and Joel already outside, both looking sick. "I heard my grandmother," Joel said quietly. "That song, she used to sing it." "My mother," Sarah whispered. Marcus just nodded. His hands shook as he tried to light the stove for coffee. None of them mentioned the red coat. Not yet. But Sarah saw it in their eyes, the knowing, the fear, the certainty that they'd all seen the same impossible thing. They broke camp at 7:15 a.m., desperate to move, to put distance between themselves and whatever had circled them in the dark. The trail should have continued west, following the creek drainage toward mile marker 12. The map showed it clearly. The GPS confirmed it, but after 2 hours of hiking, they passed mile marker 7 again. "That's impossible," Joel said flatly. He checked his own GPS, his compass, the sun's position. Everything pointed west. They'd been walking west, but here was the same clearing, the same fire pit, still holding their ash from last night. "We must have gotten turned around," Marcus said, but his voice carried no conviction. They'd followed the trail. There was only one trail. You couldn't get turned around on a maintained trail. They started again, walking faster now. Marcus led this time, Joel in the middle, Sarah bringing up the rear. She kept checking behind them, certain she'd see someone following. The forest remained empty, but the certainty wouldn't leave her. Noon came and went. They should have covered 8 miles, should have been approaching the junction with the South Fork Trail. Instead, at 2:30 p.m., they passed mile marker 7 for the 3rd time. "This isn't real," Joel said. His face had gone gray. This can't be real, but the marker was real. Weathered wood, carved numbers, exactly where it should be, exactly where it had been, exactly where it would be again. Sarah pulled out her journal, hands shaking. She needed to document this, needed evidence. She wrote the date, the time, the GPS coordinates. Then she saw Marcus and Joel doing the same thing, all 3 of them writing in their journals with the desperate focus of people trying to prove their sanity. When Sarah looked down at her own words, her blood went cold. She'd written, "The woman in red coat walked past our tent at 3:47 a.m., humming a lullaby I remember from childhood. Her feet never touched the ground." She hadn't meant to write that. She'd meant to document the repeated marker, the impossible loop. But her hand had written something else, and when she looked at Marcus's journal, tilted toward her in his distraction, she saw the same words in his handwriting. Joel's journal showed the same entry, word for word, identical. They didn't discuss it, didn't compare notes. The knowing hung between them like a noose drawing tight. They simply started walking again, and this time no one bothered checking the compass. What did directions matter when the forest had folded space into impossible geometry? The 4th time they reached mile marker 7, the sun was setting. They hadn't eaten since breakfast, hadn't stopped for water, just walked and walked and walked and always returned. "We have to camp here," Marcus said. His voice was hollow, defeated. "There's nowhere else." They set up their tents in the same positions, built fire in the same pit, went through the motions of normalcy while knowing nothing would ever be normal again. The GPS still transmitted, still showed their position fixed, still lied about everything that mattered. Sarah tried the satellite communicator, pressed the SOS button, watched it blink red, searching for signal, failing, searching, failing. The device that had confirmed connection this morning now found only static. At 11:30 p.m., the footsteps began again. This time they were slower, more deliberate, and they didn't circle. They approached. Sarah heard them moving between the tents, heard fabric brushing against something, heard breathing that wasn't quite human, too measured, too perfect, like an imitation of life rather than life itself. At 3:47 a.m., she unzipped her tent. She didn't mean to, didn't decide to. Her hands simply moved, and the zipper descended, and she found herself looking out into the clearing where the red coat waited. The woman stood between the tents, her back to Sarah. The coat was bright, even in darkness, a red so vivid it seemed to generate its own light. She hummed the lullaby, and Sarah's mouth moved in time with the melody, remembering words she'd never learned, feeling them in her throat like something inherited, ancient, wrong. The woman turned, her face blurred at the edges, features shifting like film damaged by heat. Where her eyes should have been, there were only dark spaces that bent the starlight around them. Her mouth moved with the humming, but it moved wrong, too wide, too many angles, like something that had learned smiling from photographs, but never understood the mechanics of human joy. She raised one hand and pointed at the trees behind Joel's tent. Sarah watched, paralyzed. As the forest began to change, the bark of the nearest Douglas fir rippled, split, opened like a mouth. Inside, the heartwood glowed dark red, warm as flesh. The tree reached with branches that moved like arms, and Sarah saw Joel's tent collapse inward, folding and folding and folding, until it disappeared into that impossible opening. Marcus's tent followed. The fabric screamed as it compressed, and somewhere in that sound was Marcus's own scream, cut short. The woman in red turned toward Sarah's tent. Sarah tried to move, tried to run, but her body wouldn't obey. The woman walked forward, glided forward, her feet passing an inch above the ground, leaving no prints, disturbing no needles. Up close, she was worse. Her proportions were wrong, arms too long, fingers with too many joints, neck that bent at an angle that should have broken bone. The humming continued, but now Sarah could hear other voices beneath it. Marcus, Joel, dozens of others, maybe hundreds, all humming the same lullaby in perfect unison. The woman reached the tent, extended one impossible hand, touched the fabric with fingers that passed through it like smoke. Where she touched, the nylon began to fold, reality creasing along lines that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Sarah felt the folding in her own body, felt her perception compress, bend, twist. She could see the trees and the woman and her own hands all from impossible angles simultaneously. Could see Marcus and Joel inside the trees, their bodies wrapped in heartwood that pulsed like a slow heartbeat, their mouths open in screams that produced only humming. The woman leaned closer. Her blurred face filled Sarah's vision. Behind the blur, something ancient looked out, something that had been here before the trees, before the mountains, before the first humans walked this coast, something that fed on loops, on repetition, on the trapped moment stretched forever. Fold, the woman whispered, though her mouth never stopped humming. The word came from somewhere else, somewhere behind Sarah's own thoughts. The tent collapsed. The world collapsed. Sarah felt herself compress, dimension crushing into dimension, her body folding along seams she didn't know existed. She was in the tree and outside the tree, was screaming and humming, was dying and living and trapped in the space between where time ran in circles and the woman in red walked forever at 3:47 a.m. The folding stopped. Sarah found herself standing outside her tent, the fabric intact, the clearing unchanged. The woman in red was gone. The stars had appeared in the patch of sky above, sharp and cold. Her GPS read 4:15 a.m., She staggered to Marcus's tent, pulled the zipper. Empty. Sleeping bag unzipped from within. Personal items arranged in a perfect circle. Joel's tent the same. Empty. Arranged. Gone. Sarah screamed their names. The forest absorbed the sound, gave back only the whisper of wind in the canopy. She grabbed her GPS, her communicator, her pack, started running west, following the trail by instinct and desperation. Behind her, she heard trees moving, heard bark splitting and closing, heard the humming multiply, dozens of voices becoming hundreds, becoming a choir that sang the lullaby in harmony impossible for human throats. She ran harder, breath burning in her lungs. The GPS showed her moving, blue dot tracking along the line, but she knew it lied, knew the forest had caught her in its pattern. Still, she ran. The woman in red appeared on the trail ahead, 30 feet away. Sarah changed direction, plunged into undergrowth, branches tearing at her face. The woman appeared again, always ahead, always waiting. Her blurred face turned towards Sarah with patient inevitability. Sarah's legs gave out. She fell, hands plunging into moss that felt warm, too warm. She looked up and saw Marcus in the tree above, his body wrapped in wood that had grown around him impossibly fast, his eyes open, his mouth moving in the eternal hum. Joel was in the tree beside him, folded and pressed and merged with heartwood stained the color of old blood. The woman in red stood over Sarah, bent down with her impossible angles, reached out with fingers that existed in too many dimensions, touched Sarah's hair. Where she touched, color bled away. Sarah felt it happening, felt the pigment drain from every strand, felt something fundamental pulled out through the follicles. The woman was taking time itself, pulling years through Sarah's hair like thread through a needle. Then the woman stopped, tilted her blurred head, and stepped back. Sarah didn't understand why, didn't question it. She crawled to her feet and ran through forest that folded and unfolded around her, through the loop that bent back on itself, through the mathematics of nightmare-made geography. 7 days later, Sarah Chen walked out of the Quinaul Rainforest at the northern trailhead, 18 miles from where she'd entered. She weighed 103 pounds. She'd entered at 126. Her hair was completely white, every strand bleached of color. Though she was 31 years old, she carried her journal, Marcus's journal, Joel's journal. All three contained identical entries for November 17th, 2020. All three described the woman in red coat. All three noted she never touched the ground. The search teams found her collapsed at the ranger station, dehydrated, hypothermic, barely conscious. In the hospital, she drew a map with shaking hands, showed the rangers exactly where Marcus Webb and Joel Pritchard would be found. The excavation teams went in with chainsaws and anxiety. They found the trees Sarah had marked ancient Douglas firs, each over 400 years old. When they began cutting, the trees bled. Not sap, blood, human blood, still warm. Inside the heartwood, they found hollows, human-shaped spaces where bodies should have been. The wood had grown around these shapes, compressed around them, held them, but the shapes were empty now. Just smooth, dark wood stained red, still radiating faint warmth even days after cutting. Ground-penetrating radar showed similar hollows in 53 other trees within a quarter-mile radius. The Forest Service sealed the area. No explanation was given to the families. Sarah Chen never spoke another word. She sits in a care facility in Olympia, staring at walls, her white hair perfect and still. Sometimes, late at night, the nurses hear her humming. Always the same song. Always at 3:47 a.m. The thermal drone footage from day 4 of the search remains classified in Washington State Patrol evidence storage. Frame-by-frame analysis shows something moving through the canopy, pacing the search grid below. The figure displays bipedal locomotion but with limb articulation inconsistent with human skeletal structure. In frame 847, enhanced imaging reveals what appears to be red fabric. The footage has never been publicly released. Mile marker 7 was removed from the Quinault Loop Trail in March 2021. The trail was rerouted. Official explanations cited erosion concerns. The woman in red has not been seen again, but the trees grow warm in November. And sometimes hikers report GPS failures at coordinates 47.5891, negative 123.8734, exactly where 3 experienced backpackers stopped transmitting on a night when the forest remembered what it had always been. The lullaby has no known origin. Linguistics experts find no match in any documented folk tradition. Yet 6 witnesses in separate incidents have reported hearing it near mile marker 7's former location, and all describe remembering it from childhood. Some loops don't break, they just wait for the next person to enter at precisely the right moment. When the forest folds, and the woman walks, and the trees open to receive what was promised long before trails were cut or maps were drawn. The case remains open in Washington State Patrol files, marked unexplained disappearance, though the word disappearance fails to capture what was witnessed, documented, and sealed away in archives that grow heavier with each November. The Quinault remembers. The loop remains, and somewhere in the canopy, in trees that bleed and hollow spaces that wait, Marcus Webb and Joel Pritchard still hum a song they never learned, folded into the forest's eternal geometry where 3:47 a.m. lasts forever, and the woman in red still walks her patient circuit, feet never touching ground, face blurred like film damaged by something older than light itself. The evidence mounts. What follows was pulled from corrupted university archives and field journals that should have been destroyed. In the summer of 2018, Dr. Raymond Koss drove his equipment-laden truck down the crumbling access road into Solduke's old-growth sector with the methodical precision of a man who'd spent 2 decades studying migration patterns. The valley spread before him in layers of cathedral, cedar, and Sitka spruce, their canopies so dense the forest floor existed in perpetual twilight. His objective was clinical: document elk movement through the ancient corridors, contribute data to the university's long-term ecological study. He had 14 weeks, 47 motion-activated trail cameras, and a research grant that covered fuel and nothing else. The cameras went up in a grid-pattern, tree-mounted, IR-equipped, weather-proofed against the relentless Pacific Northwest moisture. This account is reconstructed from his field journals, camera metadata, and a single interview conducted before his resignation. Dr. Koss has not been available for follow-up questions since October 2018. The first 8 weeks proceeded exactly as projected. The cameras captured what they were designed to capture: Roosevelt elk moving in small herds through the understory, black-tailed deer browsing on salal, the occasional black bear investigating deadfall. Koss drove in every Wednesday to swap SD cards, logging each camera's position in his field notebook with coordinates accurate to 6 decimal places. The forest maintained its character wet, silent except for the drip of condensation from needles overhead, smelling of decay and growth occurring simultaneously. He worked alone. The old-growth sector sat 4 miles from the nearest maintained trail, accessible only by logging roads the Park Service had stopped grading in the 1,980 seconds. Cell service disappeared 2 miles before the valley entrance. The cameras operated on 7-day cycles. Each Wednesday, Koss would hike the grid 12 miles total. Elevation gain negligible. Terrain challenging only where windfall blocked the deer trails he followed. He transferred footage to his laptop that night in his motel room in Forks, scanning thumbnails for anything worth detailed review. Elk, deer, raccoons, Douglas squirrels. One camera caught a cougar passing through at 3:17 a.m., muscles sliding under tawny fur. Standard data. Publishable, if unexciting. The forest performed its ancient routines while his cameras watched in infrared monochrome. Week 9 arrived with the same gray sky and dripping canopy. Koss noticed the anomaly while reviewing Camera 12's footage, positioned in a grove where 3 massive cedars formed a natural intersection. The timestamp read 2:13 a.m., September 4th. Between the trees, in the middle distance where the infrared's range started to fade, something stood. The frame counter labeled it 347. At first glance, it resembled a person bipedal, upright, motionless. But the proportions registered wrong. Too tall, 7 feet at minimum, possibly 8. Difficult to gauge without reference points beyond the tree trunks. The figure's skin appeared pale, almost luminous in the IR wash, reminiscent of stripped birch bark. What troubled Koss more than the presence itself was the positioning. The figure faced the camera directly. Trail cameras used infrared illumination invisible to normal vision. Animals looked toward them only by coincidence, responding to the faint mechanical click of the shutter. This thing stared into the lens as though it could see the light spectrum that shouldn't exist for biological eyes. Koss made a note in his field journal. Possible trespasser. Camera 12 vicinity. Monitor subsequent recordings. He flagged the frame and continued his review. The forest gave him nothing else unusual that week. Cameras 1 through 11 showed expected patterns. Cameras 13 through 47 captured only wildlife and wind-moved vegetation. Camera 12's subsequent recordings revealed the figure in 13 of the next 17 nights. Always between 2 and 3 a.m. Always motionless. But the distance changed. Frame 389. September 7th. Closer, by approximately 15 feet. Now standing at the edge of the middle tree line. Frame 412. September 9th. Closer still. Positioned where the undergrowth thinned into needle litter. Frame 441. September 12th. Near enough that infrared captured texture skin that wasn't skin. Surface marked with patterns resembling lichen or burn scarring. It moved only between recordings. Each night's footage showed it in a new position, one tree line nearer, but never captured in the act of movement. The motion sensor should have triggered during approach. The camera's detection field extended 40 feet. Nothing that size could cross that distance without activating multiple frames. Yet the footage showed only stillness, absent one frame. Present the next, closer each time. Koss drove to camera 12's location on week 10. The cedar grove looked exactly as it appeared in the footage. 3 massive trunks forming a Y intersection. Forest floor carpeted in rust-colored needles. Understory light filtered to almost nothing. He examined the ground for footprints. The needle layer, undisturbed, showed no sign of passage. He checked the camera itself. Functioning normally. SD card, uncorrupted. Battery, at 73%. He made another field note. No physical evidence of trespasser. Camera operation confirmed normal. Possibly equipment malfunction producing false positives. He didn't believe the explanation, even as he wrote it. Week 11 brought the figure to within 3 feet of camera 12's lens. Frame 891, October 1st, 2:27 a.m. The entire frame filled with it. Height irrelevant now, only its upper torso and face visible, shot from below as though it had leaned down to examine the camera. Koss watched the footage 3 times before he could process the details. The face was human in the way a reflection in disturbed water is human recognizable but fundamentally wrong. Features stretched vertically, skin pulled taut over bone structure that suggested a skull too long from crown to jaw. The eyes, if they were eyes, appeared as dark voids in the infrared spectrum, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The mouth hung open, wide, wider than human anatomy permitted, jaw distended in a rictus that exposed not teeth but a cavity filled with organic matter, moss, beetles, small moving things that crawled across what might have been a tongue. The footage was silent, but Koss could imagine the sound. Wet, chittering, the noise of decomposition occurring inside something still upright. He sat in his motel room with his laptop open. The frame paused on that face and felt his hands shaking. The camera had captured this thing studying the lens with what appeared to be curiosity or recognition. After 30 seconds of stillness, the frame ended. The next recording, triggered 7 minutes later, showed only the empty grove. That night, Koss began reviewing all 47 cameras' audio files, something he'd never done before. Trail cameras recorded sound as secondary data, usually ignored in wildlife studies. He isolated camera 12's audio from the nights the figure appeared, The whispers started in week 9, faint, barely audible beneath wind noise and the settling sounds of the forest. Human voice, male, speaking in fragments. Migration patterns consistent with grant renewal, dependent on. Mother wouldn't recognize this place now. The words were his thoughts, observations he'd made silently while hiking the grid, concerns about funding he'd never voiced, a memory of his childhood home he'd been turning over in his mind for weeks. The whispers spoke his interior monologue in his own voice, recorded by a camera positioned in a grove he'd never stood in. Koss returned to Sol Duck on week 12 with the intention of retrieving all cameras and terminating the study early. His field notes from October 10th documented the decision. Unexplained phenomena exceeding research parameters. Equipment possibly compromised. Study suspension recommended. He started at the perimeter and worked inward, pulling cameras from their tree mounts, sealing them in waterproof bags. The forest felt different. Watching, the silence had texture now, a pressure against his eardrums that intensified the deeper he hiked into the grid. Camera 47 was positioned in the valley's deepest section, where the old growth gave way to areas the Park Service designated as mature forest, code for second growth from logging operations a century past. The trees here grew smaller, packed tighter, creating walls of shadow even at midday. Koss reached the camera at 4 p.m. Removed it. Checked the final recording timestamp, October 9th, 4 a.m. He didn't review the footage until he was back in his motel room. All 47 cameras logged and secured. Camera 47's final week showed standard nocturnal activity until October 9th. Frame 1147, 4 a.m. The footage showed him Dr. Raymond Koss walking into frame from the left, moving with his characteristic gait, wearing clothes identical to what hung in his motel closet. He watched himself cross the camera's field, pause, and examine something on the ground. The timestamp was verified. October 9th, 4 a.m. On that date, at that time, Koss had been in his motel room 40 miles away. He had the receipt from the front desk, time-stamped when he'd paid for an additional night at 11:47 p.m. on October 8th. He had not left the room until 7:30 a.m. The figure entered frame 3 seconds after his doppelganger appeared. It walked behind the false Koss with jerking, mechanical precision, mimicking his movements with a half-second delay. When the doppelganger bent to examine the ground, the figure bent. When the doppelganger straightened and turned right, the figure straightened and turned right. But the mimicry was wrong, too precise. Movements copied exactly rather than performed naturally, like watching someone trace over their own shadow. The figure's full form was visible now. 8 feet tall, minimum. Body proportioned like something built from memory of human anatomy rather than governed by it. Impossibly thin, arms too long, hanging past where knees would be, legs that bent at angles suggesting additional joints. The pale skin caught the infrared and reflected it back, making the figure appear to glow against the darkness of the surrounding forest. Then both figures stopped. The doppelganger turned toward the camera. So did the figure. They stared directly into the lens for 43 seconds. Koss timed it before the doppelganger walked out of frame to the right. The figure remained. It moved forward, closer, until it stood where Koss had stood, occupying the exact space his double had vacated. It raised one hand toward the camera. The fingers extended into frame, 7 of them, emerging from a palm too wide, each finger segmented wrong, too many knuckles, nails black and cracked like charred wood. Behind the hand, visible in the middle distance, moss on a cedar trunk formed letters. Koss zoomed the footage. The letters resolved into coordinates: 47.82, 34 degrees north, 123.9876 degrees west. His childhood home. The house in Shelton his mother had abandoned in 1993 after his father's death, left to rot on 18 acres of second-growth timber. He hadn't been back in 25 years. Had never mentioned it to colleagues. had certainly never recorded the coordinates anywhere the camera could access. Koss reported his findings to the University of Washington's biology department on October 15th. He submitted his formal research data, flagged the anomalous footage, and requested immediate technical review. The department chair assigned 2 graduate students to examine the files. They downloaded the camera data to the university's server at 2 p.m. on October 16th. By 4 p.m., the corruption was complete. Every frame showing the figure had degraded to digital noise. Audio files containing the whispers had become white static. Metadata indicated the original timestamps and file sizes, but the content was irrecoverable. The graduate students found evidence of bit rot consistent with severe electromagnetic interference, though the SD cards had been stored in shielded cases. Of the 14 weeks of footage, only 1 frame remained intact. Frame 1147, camera 47, October 9th, 4A. The image of the figure's hand reaching toward the lens, fingers extended, coordinates visible in the moss behind it. That frame was included in Koss's final report, submitted October 18th alongside his resignation from the university. The report concluded, "Phenomena observed exceed current explanatory frameworks. Study cannot be completed under existing methodology. Recommend indefinite suspension of research activity in Solduck old-growth sector." Koss did not return to Solduck. He accepted a position with a forestry consulting firm in eastern Washington, work that kept him in ponderosa pine and away from coastal rainforest. When contacted for follow-up questions in November 2018, he declined through his attorney. His former colleagues noted he'd lost weight, stopped sleeping properly, had developed a habit of checking his rearview mirror compulsively while driving. In March 2019, a Park Service ranger conducting routine trail maintenance in Solduck's old-growth sector found camera 12 still mounted to its cedar, battery dead but SD card intact. The ranger, unaware of Koss's study, reviewed the footage as potential evidence of illegal activity. The final recording, dated February 23, 2019, 4 months after Koss had retrieved, the camera showed the grove at 2:13 a.m., empty except for a message scraped into the bark of the central cedar, letters 2 feet tall, fresh enough that sap still wept from the wounds. He knows we're the same now. The camera remains in Park Service evidence storage. Dr. Raymond Koss has not responded to inquiries since 2019, and his current whereabouts are unknown. The evidence mounts. What follows emerged from sealed Olympic National Park archives a ranger's testimony that should have remained buried. In the dense, rain-soaked wilderness of Olympic National Park, where ancient glaciers carve valleys into the earth and suspension bridges sway above rivers churning with snowmelt, Ranger Thomas Albright had learned to trust his instincts. 20 years patrolling these trails had taught him that the forest didn't lie, people did. But on the evening of October 14th, 2017, when his radio crackled with a distress beacon from Carbon River's suspension bridge, something in the static made his hands cold. The report, detailed in park archives, describes 2 college students, Emma Rodriguez and Tyler Vance, who had activated their emergency transponder at dusk, their voices breaking with panic as they claimed someone was following them from the glacier trail. Albright grabbed his pack and headed into the failing light, where fog from the Carbon River was already creeping through the Douglas firs like something living, something patient. The hike to the suspension bridge took 40 minutes in good conditions. Albright made it in 25, his flashlight cutting through curtains of mist that swallowed the beam within feet. The forest was too quiet. No bird calls, no rustle of small animals in the undergrowth, just the distant rush of the Carbon River and his own breathing, steady but alert. He'd responded to dozens of distress calls over the years, injured hikers, lost tourists, the occasional bear encounter, but something about the silence pressed against his eardrums like a change in pressure before a storm. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees since he'd left the ranger station, and the fog carried that mineral smell of glacier water. Ancient ice, melting into something that had never seen sunlight. He found them beneath the suspension bridge, exactly where they'd said they'd be. Emma Rodriguez and Tyler Vance were pressed against the concrete foundation, their backpacks abandoned 10 feet away, their faces pale in the dimming twilight. They were college seniors from Seattle, experienced hikers according to their permits, but they looked at Albright like drowning people spotting a rescue boat. Emma's hands were shaking. Tyler kept glancing over his shoulder at the trail they'd come from, his jaw working soundlessly. Albright approached slowly, keeping his voice calm and professional. "I'm Ranger Albright. You activated your beacon. What's going on?" Emma spoke first, her words tumbling out too fast. "They'd been hiking the glacier trail since noon," she said, taking their time, enjoying the views. Around 3 o'clock, maybe 4 miles in, Tyler had noticed someone behind them on the trail. A man in hunting gear, orange vest, weathered jacket, boots that looked military issue. At first, they'd thought nothing of it. Plenty of people hiked these trails. But the man maintained perfect distance, 50 yards. Never closer, never farther. When they stopped to rest, he stopped. When they moved, he moved. 6 miles of this. 6 miles of a man who never called out a greeting, never tried to pass them, never acknowledged their existence beyond matching their pace exactly. Tyler took over, his voice hoarse. "His face," he said, staring at the ground. His face was wrong. Albright had heard a lot of panic-driven descriptions in his career. People saw things in the wilderness, especially when fear took hold. Shadows became bears, tree stumps became predators. But Tyler's next words made something cold settle in Albright's stomach. The man's face, Tyler said, had been shifting. Not like a trick of light or distance, but actual shifting between Emma's features and his own. One moment, the man had Emma's sharp cheekbones and dark eyes. The next, Tyler's broader jaw and pale skin. Never settling, never stable, just cycling between their faces like a reflection trying to decide who to imitate. Albright kept his expression neutral, but his hand moved to his radio unconsciously. "How close did you get to him?" "Never closer than 50 yards, Emma whispered. "We tried to let him pass. We stepped off the trail, stood there for 10 minutes. He just stopped too, stood there, watching. When we started walking again, so did he. Always 50 yards back." The suspension bridge loomed above them, a narrow wooden structure spanning 200 feet across the Carbon River Gorge. The water below was invisible in the fog, but Albright could hear it, that perpetual rush of glacier melt churning over stones, the sound that never stopped, never changed. He looked at the students, then at the trail leading back the way they'd come. The fog had thickened. Visibility was maybe 20 feet. He saw nothing, no movement, no figure in hunting gear, no one maintaining perfect distance. "I'll escort you out," Albright said. "Stay close to me." We crossed the bridge, follow the loop trail back to the parking lot. "It's a mile and a half. We'll be at your car in 30 minutes. They nodded, but neither moved toward the bridge. Emma was staring at it like it was a precipice into something worse than the gorge. "We have to cross it?" she asked. "It's the fastest way out. The alternative is backtracking 6 miles on the glacier trail." "The trail where he is," Tyler said quietly. Albright didn't argue. He led them onto the bridge. The wooden planks were slick with condensation, and the whole structure swayed gently in the wind that funneled through the gorge. Safety cables ran along both sides, but the bridge felt exposed, suspended above nothing but fog and the distant roar of water. Albright went first, Emma behind him, Tyler bringing up the rear. Their footsteps echoed against the wooden planks, 3 sets of boots, steady rhythm. The sound swallowed almost immediately by the mist. They were halfway across when Albright heard the 4th set of footsteps. Heavy boots, same rhythm, same pace. Behind them, he stopped. The students stopped. The footsteps stopped. Albright turned slowly. The bridge behind them was empty, just wooden planks disappearing into fog, the safety cables dripping with moisture. Nothing else. Tyler's face had gone gray. Emma had her hand clamped over her mouth. "You heard it," she whispered. Albright had heard it. He was still hearing it, not the footsteps themselves, but the echo of them. The memory of boots on wood that matched their pace too perfectly to be coincidence. He swept his flashlight across the bridge. Empty. He looked past the bridge to the trail beyond. Nothing moved in the fog. "Keep moving," he said, his voice harder than he intended. They crossed the rest of the bridge quickly, their footsteps loud and panicked. And the whole time Albright heard that fourth set of boots, heavy and deliberate, keeping perfect pace with them even though the bridge remained empty. When they reached solid ground on the far side, all three of them were breathing hard, their breath misting in the cold air. Emma was crying silently. Tyler kept turning to look back at the bridge, his hands clenched into fists. The 1.5 miles to the parking lot passed in oppressive silence. The fog pressed in from all sides, and Albright kept his flashlight moving, scanning the tree line, the trail ahead, the trail behind. Nothing, just fog and darkness and the sound of their breathing. When they finally reached the parking lot, Albright felt a knot in his chest, loosen slightly. The student's car was there, a blue Honda Civic, right where it should be. Then Emma made a sound, a choked gasp that turned into something close to a scream. The car's windows were completely obscured, not with dirt or mud, but with moss, thick, green, living moss pressed against every window from the inside, covering the glass so completely that nothing was visible within. The doors were still locked. Albright checked every door, every seal, locked tight. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows. He used his flashlight to peer through the gaps in the moss coverage and saw the interior packed with its seats, dashboard, floor, all of it buried under moss that looked ancient, the kind that grew in the deepest parts of the forest where sunlight never reached. Tyler was backing away from the car, shaking his head. Emma stood frozen, staring at the driver's side window where moss pressed against the glass like a living thing trying to get out. Albright radioed for backup, his voice steady despite the ice spreading through his veins. He reported the situation using professional language, vehicle tampering, possible wildlife intrusion, requesting investigation team. But the words felt hollow. He knew what he was looking at. This wasn't tampering. This was something else. The investigation team arrived an hour later with portable lights and documentation equipment. They photographed the car from every angle, took samples of the moss, catalogued everything with bureaucratic precision. When they finally opened the doors, the moss tumbled out in heavy clumps, covering their boots, releasing a smell of deep earth and decay. The team leader, a woman named Sarah Chen, examined the moss with gloved hands and confirmed what Albright already suspected it was. Old growth, the kind that took decades to develop, not hours. Every surface inside the car was covered. Even the rear view mirror had moss growing across its face. Back at the ranger station, Albright filed his report and tried to ignore the way his hands shook as he typed. He included every detail: the student's description of the man in hunting gear, the footsteps on the bridge, the moss in the car. He expected skepticism, maybe a suggestion of stress leave. Instead, Sarah Chen pulled him into her office and showed him a file from the archives. Ronald Dash. Missing person report from 1981. Last seen hiking the Carbon River Trail in October, wearing an orange hunting vest and weathered jacket. His truck had been found at the same parking lot where the student's car had been. Doors locked. Interior filled with something the original report described as vegetation of unknown origin. Darsh had never been found. No body, no trace. Just the truck and a single photograph in the missing persons file. The photograph showed a man in his 40s with a strong jaw and intense eyes, wearing the orange vest and weathered jacket. The description in the file noted a fractured jaw from a previous injury, healed but visible in the asymmetry of his face. The same asymmetry Emma and Tyler had described. The same clothing. The same everything. Albright stared at the photograph, and the photograph stared back, and something cold wrapped around his spine. Sarah Chen's voice was quiet. There have been other reports over the years. Hikers seeing someone following them on the Carbon River trails. Always the same description. Always maintaining the same distance. The Park Service keeps it quiet. That night, Albright went home to his cabin at the edge of the park. He double-checked the locks, made coffee he didn't drink, sat in his kitchen trying to process what he'd seen. Around midnight, motion sensors on his security camera sent an alert to his phone. He pulled up the feed and felt his blood stop. Someone was standing at his window. The figure was motionless, face pressed directly against the glass, breath fogging the pane in steady rhythm. Albright grabbed his flashlight and went to the window, but when he looked out, he saw details that made his throat close. The face pressed to the glass was shifting, cycling. One moment it was Emma Rodriguez's face, her dark eyes wide and terrified. Then it changed to Tyler Vance's broader features, his expression blank. Then another face Albright didn't recognize. Then another. Then another. Faces cycling through like a slideshow, each one different, each one wearing the same expression of hollow recognition. Albright checked the park's missing persons archive on his laptop, pulling up photographs of everyone reported missing in the Carbon River Valley over the past 40 years. 16 people, 16 faces, and as he watched the security camera feed, he saw every one of those faces appear on the figure standing at his window, cycling through them in sequence, never stopping, never settling. The figure stood there for 4 hours. Albright watched the entire time, unable to look away, unable to sleep. At 4:17 a.m., the figure finally stepped back from the window and walked into the darkness. When Albright went outside at dawn, he found handprints on the window glass pressed deep, as if the figure had been pushing with enormous pressure. The wood frame around the window was burned, charred black in the exact shape of those handprints. The burn marks were still warm. The investigation into Emma Rodriguez and Tyler Vance continued for 3 months. Park rangers searched the Carbon River area repeatedly. Tyler returned to Seattle and refused to speak about the incident. But Emma Rodriguez vanished. Her apartment was found empty, her belongings untouched, her phone and wallet left behind. No one saw her leave. No one knew where she'd gone. On January 19, 2018, a day hiker found her near the Carbon River Suspension Bridge, exactly where she and Tyler had activated their emergency beacon 3 months earlier. She was alive, unharmed, wearing the same clothes she'd disappeared in. When rangers arrived, Emma couldn't explain where she'd been. She had no memory of the intervening months. She kept asking what day it was, confused when they told her she'd been missing. The medical examination found nothing wrong with her, except for one detail. Her hands were covered in moss, pressed under her fingernails, embedded in the lines of her palms, the same ancient old-growth moss that had filled her car. Thomas Albright's testimony remains sealed in Olympic National Park archives, marked for restricted access. The burn marks on his cabin window are still visible, still warm to the touch despite years of rain and weather. The Carbon River trails remain open to the public, and hikers still report seeing a figure in hunting gear, maintaining perfect distance behind them, 50 yards back, never closer, never speaking. The Park Service logs each report with clinical precision and says nothing. The suspension bridge sways in the wind, and the footsteps continue, measured and patient, waiting for the next person who will stop and listen and realize they're not alone. The forest remembers, the river remembers, and somewhere in the fog, Ronald Dosh walks the trails he never left, wearing faces that don't belong to him, following hikers who will never reach their cars unchanged. The archives refuse to rest. We return to the water's edge, where cold depths conceal congregations that should not exist. The suppressed incident files from Olympic National Park's Lake Crescent remain sealed under federal jurisdiction, their contents accessible only through FOIA requests that took 3 years to process. What follows is reconstructed from ranger dispatch recordings, medical examiner reports, hyperbaric therapy session transcripts, and sonar analysis conducted by the U.S. Geological Survey in August 2021. The case involves solo kayaker Nicole Tran, 29, an experienced open-water paddler who launched from the Spruce Railroad Trail launch point at 11:45 p.m. on August 14th. Her satellite emergency beacon activated at 12:40 a.m. By 1 a.m., she was 40 feet below the surface, medically alive but fundamentally altered. What she brought back from those depths contradicts every principle of drowning physiology and challenges our understanding of what waits beneath Washington's deepest glacial lake. The launch point security camera captured Nicole Tran pushing her 17-foot touring kayak into Lake Crescent's black water at 11:47 p.m., the timestamp glowing in the corner of grainy footage that would later be reviewed by 3 separate federal agencies. The lake stretched before her like polished obsidian, 624 feet deep at its center, fed by glacial runoff that kept the water temperature hovering near 48 degrees even in August. She wore a dry suit, her satellite phone clipped to her life vest, a headlamp cutting a narrow beam across water so clear that during daylight you could see 30 feet down into blue-green nothing. Ranger dispatch logs indicate calm conditions, no wind, no precipitation, air temperature 52 degrees. Lake Crescent sat in a glacially carved trough between mountain walls, the kind of geological formation that created its own weather patterns, its own acoustic properties. Sound traveled strangely here. Voices carried across the water with unnatural clarity, then died completely in the mountain shadows. Nicole had paddled these waters dozens of times, always at night, always alone, drawn to the lake's midnight stillness the way some people are drawn to empty cathedrals. Her paddle strokes created bioluminescent sparkles in the water, microorganisms lighting up with each disturbance. The effect was hypnotic in darkness, her kayak trailing phosphorescent ripples that faded into black. She headed toward the lake's deepest section, following the GPS track she'd paddled a dozen times before. The nearest shore lay 3/4 of a mile away. The water beneath her keel dropped away into depths that had swallowed at least 43 people since the lake's formation 10,000 years ago. At 12:22 a.m., Nicole's satellite phone recorded the first anomaly, a temperature reading from her hull-mounted thermometer that showed the water dropping from 48 degrees to 39 degrees in less than 2 minutes. The device logged the data automatically, time-stamped, and uploaded to her cloud backup. She stopped paddling. In the recording recovered from her phone's final transmission, you can hear her breathing change rhythm. Hear the kayak's hull creaking in the silence. The water around her kayak had begun to move. Not waves or current, Lake Crescent was a closed system. No rivers flowing in or out, just glacial seepage and rainfall. This was circulation from below, water rising from depths that should have been thermally stable. Nicole's headlamp caught the movement as she looked down through the transparent surface. Something large displaced water beneath her, creating pressure waves that lifted her kayak 2 inches, then lowered it again. The motion repeated, rhythmic, deliberate. She reached for her satellite phone at 12:38 a.m. The dispatch recording captures her voice, professionally calm despite what she reported. This is kayaker Nicole Tran on Lake Crescent. Coordinates north 48.053, west 123.817. Requesting immediate assistance. I have an equipment malfunction and water temperature anomalies. Something is moving beneath my kayak. Large displacement. It's pulling me. The transmission ended. Not with a scream or splash, but with a sound the dispatcher described as hydraulic compression, like water being forced through a narrow opening under immense pressure. The GPS beacon continued transmitting her position for another 40 seconds as her kayak moved across the lake surface, not drifting with wind or current, but describing a perfect spiral pattern, circling tighter and tighter until the signal stopped at exactly 12:40 a.m. Ranger dispatch launched the emergency response at 12:41 a.m. 2 patrol boats with thermal imaging equipment departed from the East Beach dock, covering the 3-mile distance to Nicole's last known position in 18 minutes. They arrived to find her kayak floating upright in water, now calm as black glass. The paddle floated 15 feet away. Her dry suit hood drifted nearby. The kayak showed no damage, no signs of struggle. The water around it registered 48 degrees normal temperature, as if the thermal anomaly had never occurred. Dive team protocols required waiting for daylight, but thermal imaging detected something 40 feet below the surface, suspended motionless in the water column. The heat signature read 94 degrees, close to human body temperature in water that should have induced fatal hypothermia within minutes. Lead diver Marcus Chen went down at 1:07 a.m. with full cave diving equipment and high-intensity underwater lights. His helmet camera recorded the descent. The footage shows him dropping through water so clear it felt like falling through empty space. His lights illuminating nothing but blue transparency and occasional suspended particles. At 35 feet, his lights found her. Nicole Tran hung in the water column, vertical, arms at her sides, eyes open and staring downward into the depths below. She wasn't floating, her position was too stable, too perfectly vertical. She looked like she was standing on something invisible, like the water itself held her in place. Chen reached her at 40 feet. She was alive. Her eyes tracked his approach but showed no recognition, no fear, no response to his presence. He clipped a safety line to her vest and signaled for ascent. When he pulled her upward, she came easily, her body limp and compliant. But as they rose past 30 feet, Nicole's mouth opened and she exhaled a stream of air bubbles, except she shouldn't have had any air left after being submerged for 27 minutes without breathing equipment. They brought her up slowly, following decompression protocols she shouldn't have needed. She emerged into the patrol boat's lights at 1:23 a.m., skin pale blue in the underwater floods, eyes still open and staring at nothing. Medical examination on the boat recorded the impossible. No water in her lungs, no signs of drowning or aspiration. Her core body temperature measured 83.4 degrees Fahrenheit, 15 degrees below survivable threshold. Her heart beat 40 times per minute, steady and regular. She breathed 12 times per minute. But she didn't respond to verbal commands. Pain, stimulus, or bright light shined directly into her dilated pupils. The Coast Guard helicopter evacuated her to Seattle's Harborview Medical Center by 2:40 a.m. The emergency room physician's notes describe a patient in profound catatonic state with severe hypothermia of unknown etiology. IV warming protocols raised her core temperature to 98 degrees over 6 hours. EEG showed normal brain activity. MRI revealed no structural damage, no water in the sinuses, no signs of drowning. Toxicology came back clean. Blood oxygen saturation measured 98%. By every medical metric, Nicole Tran was healthy and awake. But she didn't move, didn't speak, didn't acknowledge the existence of the world around her. For 6 days, she remained frozen in that state, eyes open, staring at nothing, breathing and blinking but never shifting position in the hospital bed. Nurses reported that her eyes sometimes tracked movement at night, following shadows across the ceiling with slow precision. On the 7th day, at 3:17 a.m., she spoke. The overnight nurse documented the moment. Nicole's mouth opened and she began speaking in a flat monotone, no inflection or emotion, describing what she'd seen 40 feet below Lake Crescent's surface. She talked for 40 minutes without pause, without repeating herself. Her voice never changing volume or pitch. The nurse recorded everything. The congregation stands below, Nicole said. They stand in rows on the lake bottom, all facing the same direction. Their mouths move but make no sound. They are praying. They have been praying for decades. Some wear recent clothing, synthetic fabrics, bright colors, hiking boots still tied. Others wear rotted period dress. Wool coats dissolving into fragments. Leather shoes splitting at the seams. Their faces are preserved in the cold water. Eyes open, watching, waiting. She described the arrangement in precise detail. 17 rows of figures, varying numbers in each row, all oriented toward the lake's deepest point. She could see their faces clearly despite the darkness, despite the 40-foot depth. The cold water and lack of oxygen had preserved them in states of partial decomposition, skin gone gray-white, hair floating like kelp in imperceptible currents. They stood upright on the silt bottom, feet planted, hands at their sides, and their mouths moved in silent unison, forming words Nicole could somehow understand despite the absence of sound. In the center stands the woman in white, Nicole continued. She is impossibly preserved. No decay, no damage. Her wedding dress remains pristine, lace perfect, fabric flowing in water that should have destroyed it decades ago. Her eyes are completely black. Not dead, black with intention. She was beckoning to me, calling me to join the congregation, to take my place in the rows, to stand and pray with them until the lake gives up its purpose. The overnight nurse contacted the supervising psychiatrist immediately. By morning, Nicole had been transferred to the psychiatric ward under observation for acute delusional disorder following near-drowning trauma. But during hyperbaric oxygen therapy sessions, standard treatment for her unexplained hypothermia, she began drawing faces. The therapy technician provided paper and pencils to keep her calm during the 90-minute sessions in the pressurized chamber. Nicole drew compulsively, filling page after page with faces rendered in meticulous detail. She drew without looking at the paper, her eyes fixed on some invisible point in the chamber's curved wall, her hand moving with mechanical precision. Each face was different. Each showed the specific features of decomposition: sunken cheeks, protruding teeth, hair loss, skin discoloration drawn with forensic accuracy. Over 3 days of therapy, she produced 247 faces. The psychiatric team initially dismissed them as traumatic hallucinations, artistic processing of her near-death experience. But when Olympic National Park ranger supervisors saw the drawings during a routine case review, they recognized 17 of the faces immediately. The recognition prompted a formal investigation that pulled missing persons files going back 70 years. The matches were undeniable. Nicole had drawn Linda Morrison, missing from a hiking trail near Lake Crescent in 2019. She'd drawn Thomas Chen, drowned during a fishing accident in 2007. She'd drawn Sarah Whitfield, disappeared while camping with her family in 1993. She'd drawn faces from cases that predated Nicole's birth, hikers and fishermen and swimmers lost to the lake's depths going back to 1952. The forensic artist brought in for comparison analysis confirmed the accuracy using age progression software and family photographs. Nicole Tran had drawn 17 confirmed drowning and missing persons victims with details she could not possibly have known. 23 additional faces matched missing persons reports from the Lake Crescent area but had never been confirmed as drowning victims. These were hikers who'd vanished from trails miles from the water, families who'd left campsites and were never seen again, solo travelers whose cars were found abandoned near scenic overlooks. The drawings suggested they'd all ended up in the same place, standing on the lake bottom in neat rows, mouths moving in silent prayer. The U.S. Geological Survey conducted emergency sonar sweeps of Lake Crescent's deepest section on August 28th, using research-grade multi-beam equipment designed for detailed bathymetric mapping. The initial scans detected the expected geological features: the glacially carved trench, sediment layers, scattered debris from decades of human activity. But at 596 feet, the sonar found something that shouldn't exist. The anomaly measured approximately 30 feet tall and roughly humanoid in overall shape. It stood upright on the lake bottom, unmoving. Its form too regular to be a geological formation, too large to be a sunken boat or debris. The sonar rendered it in shades of yellow and orange against the blue depth readings, a massive figure maintaining vertical position in currents that should have toppled anything not anchored to the bedrock. The USGS team ran 3 more scans from different positions, calibrating for equipment error or acoustic artifacts. The anomaly appeared identically in each scan, always at 596 feet, always in the same location. When they processed the data through 3D modeling software, the shape became clearer. A female figure in what appeared to be a long dress, arms extended slightly from the body, head tilted back as if looking upward through 596 feet of water toward the surface. The investigation coordinator authorized a deep dive survey using ROV equipment rated for 800-foot depths. 2 unmanned submersibles descended toward the anomaly on September 2nd, carrying high-definition cameras, sample collection tools, and full sensor arrays. Both units lost power simultaneously at 580 feet, 16 feet above the target depth. Surface operators reported total electrical failure: cameras, lights, propulsion, navigation, all systems offline in the same instant. The ROVs sank silently into the depths below the anomaly, Neither was recovered. A second ROV attempt on September 5th resulted in identical failure at 578 feet. A manned submersible dive was proposed but denied by the National Park Service on safety grounds. Lake Crescent's deepest sections were officially designated off-limits to diving operations pending further investigation. No further investigation was authorized. The case files were classified under federal park incident protocols and removed from public record systems. Nicole Tran remained in psychiatric care at Western State Hospital under 72-hour observation that extended to 2 weeks. Her catatonic episodes decreased in frequency. She began eating, walking, engaging in basic conversation, but she spoke constantly about returning to the lake, about unfinished business with the congregation, about the woman in white who waited patiently in the depths. The psychiatric evaluation recommended extended inpatient treatment for persistent delusional disorder with religious ideation. On September 11th at 4:23 a.m., Nicole Tran walked out of Western State Hospital's secure psychiatric ward. Security footage shows her entering the nurse's station, removing her patient wristband with calm deliberation, and exiting through an emergency door that should have been locked but stood inexplicably open. She wore hospital pajamas and no shoes. She walked directly to the parking lot and climbed into a taxi that surveillance cameras never recorded arriving. Olympic National Park rangers found the taxi at 6:47 a.m., parked illegally at Lake Crescent's East Beach access point, empty, engine cold. The driver was never located. Security cameras at the lake were offline due to scheduled maintenance. A maintenance window that had been logged in the system but that no park employee remembered authorizing. Footprints led from the parking area down the boat launch and into the water. The prints were bare feet, small, matching Nicole Tran's documented foot size. They entered the water at the shoreline and didn't emerge. Park rangers conducted visual searches of the shoreline and shallow areas. Dive teams swept the accessible depths through September 14th. Nicole's body was never located. But on September 16th, commercial fisherman Robert Hayes reported seeing lights beneath the lake's surface while running lines at dawn. His deck camera captured the phenomenon. Pale blue luminescence moving in formation approximately 50 feet below the surface, describing the same spiral pattern Nicole's kayak had traced before she capsized. The lights circled in perfect synchronization for 6 minutes, then descended into depths the camera could no longer detect. Similar reports accumulated through late September and October. Night fishermen documented the lights appearing between midnight and 4 a.m., always in the lake's deepest section, always moving in coordinated patterns. Wildlife cameras positioned near the shore occasionally captured the glow reflecting off the water's surface, cold blue radiance that pulsed with rhythmic regularity, like breathing, like heartbeats, like prayer. Lake Crescent remains open to the public. The deepest sections are marked on park maps with standard caution notices about cold water and underwater hazards. The sonar anomaly has not been officially acknowledged. Nicole Tran's case remains listed as a missing person, presumed drowned, body unrecovered. The suppressed incident files contain one final detail, documented in a ranger's handwritten note dated September 20th. Divers report congregation formation now 18 rows. Newest figure stands at the front. Female, hospital clothing, barefoot, head tilted upward, mouth moving in silent prayer. Counting continues. The archives hold more than records. They hold warnings. The Bogachil Valley exists in perpetual twilight, a place where the Olympic Peninsula's ancient forests compress sunlight into narrow shafts that never quite reach the forest floor. In October 2019, telecommunications technician Marcus Reeves entered this wilderness on what should have been routine maintenance work. Signal disruptions had been plaguing the region for months, creating dead zones where radio frequencies twisted into something else entirely. What Reeves documented over 73 hours would force a complete evacuation of the crew and the permanent sealing of their findings in federal archives. The recordings recovered from that operation before they were systematically erased contained voices that should not exist, conversations that spanned decades, and predictions that came true with impossible precision. This account is reconstructed from Reeves's field logs, the partial audio files that survived, and the testimony of the retrieval team that discovered what waited in those trees. The Bogachil Valley maintenance road ended 3 miles before Reeves needed it to. He stepped from the telecommunications van into air so thick with moisture, it felt like breathing through wet fabric. The rest of his crew, 4 technicians, all veterans of remote site work, moved with practiced efficiency, unloading signal detection equipment and portable recording arrays. The forest rose around them in columns of moss-covered Sitka spruce, some trunks 20 feet in diameter, their canopies invisible in the fog that clung to everything above 50 feet. Sound behaved strangely here. Footsteps vanished within yards. Words fell dead from mouths. The normal acoustic signature of forest bird calls, wind movement, the creak of wood was absent. Reeves checked his handheld spectrum analyzer. The device registered carrier waves where none should exist, radio frequencies cycling through patterns that resembled speech modulation. He'd worked communications for 18 years, installed equipment from Alaska to the Arizona desert, and he'd never encountered interference like this. The signal wasn't random static. It had structure, rhythm, the compressed dynamics of human conversation. He adjusted the analyzer's filters, trying to isolate the source. The readings pointed deeper into the valley, toward a sector of old-growth forest that maps designated as undeveloped wilderness. They established base camp at the maintenance road's terminus, a clearing barely large enough for their vehicles. Reeves set up the main recording array, 8 microphones positioned in a radial pattern, each connected to independent digital recorders. If voices existed in the signal interference, he'd capture them. The equipment activated at 14:47 hours. Within 20 minutes, the first recording began. The voice emerged from speaker 4, positioned northeast. Male, middle-aged, Pacific Northwest accent. The words were conversational, casual, discussing trail conditions and water sources. Nothing unusual except the complete absence of any visible speaker. Reeves checked the equipment calibration. The microphones were functioning perfectly, picking up genuine audio pressure waves, not electrical interference. Someone was talking in the forest, close enough to register clearly, yet the immediate area remained empty. He increased the recording sensitivity and waited. The second voice arrived 16 minutes later. Female, younger, discussing photography equipment and optimal light conditions. The conversation didn't match anything recent. The references were dated, mentioning camera models from decades past. Reeves pulled the raw audio files, analyzing the waveforms. The voices carried the authentic irregularities of human speech, breath sounds, throat clicks, the subtle variations in tone that digital synthesis couldn't replicate. These were real recordings of real people, somehow broadcasting through the forest. Over the next 6 hours, 17 different voices appeared across the microphone array. They discussed hiking routes, campsite selections, weather predictions. The conversations felt mundane until Reeves began cross-referencing the details. The voices described specific trail markers, geographic features, elevation changes, all matching known routes through the Bogachil region. Then came the dates. One conversation mentioned October 1978. Another referenced the summer of '83. The voices were discussing hikes that had occurred 20 to 40 years ago. Reeves documented everything. His field log grew detailed, almost compulsive. He noted voice characteristics, conversation topics, the geographic distribution of audio sources. The pattern that emerged made no sense. The voices clustered around a specific sector of forest approximately 1 mile northeast of camp, an area dominated by particularly ancient Sitka spruce. The trees there grew in unusual proximity, their root systems likely interconnected, forming what foresters called a clonal colony, individual trunks sharing a single underground network. On the second day, the voices changed. They began discussing people by name. Sarah Mitchell, solo hiker, northbound on Trail 7. The conversation provided details: her equipment, her planned route, her estimated arrival at specific waypoints. Reeves checked the timestamp. 9:23 hours. At 11:47, a hiker appeared on the trail camera. His crew had positioned near the main path. Female, solo. Matching the description exactly. The voice had predicted her arrival 2 hours and 24 minutes in advance. the phenomenon repeated. The voices would announce hikers, their names, their appearance, their equipment, and the hikers would appear exactly as described. The predictions were absolutely precise. Male, late 20s, red jacket, gray pack, moving south, will reach junction at 15:30. The hiker arrived at 15:29. The voices knew things they couldn't know. They described people who hadn't yet entered the forest, conversations that hadn't yet occurred. Reeves increased the recording capacity, running all 8 microphones continuously. The audio files accumulated rapidly. Gigabytes of data capturing voices that discussed the living as if observing them from some impossible vantage point. Most disturbing were the older conversations recordings that clearly originated from incidents decades past. One voice described a family of 4 hiking the valley in July 1972. Reeves cross-referenced the date against missing person records. 4 people matching the description exactly had vanished in the Bogachil region that month. The voice discussed their route, their final campsite, the moment they realized they were lost. The conversation ended with screaming. On day 3, Reeves tracked the signal source. He moved through the forest with a directional antenna, following the strongest carrier wave emissions. The path led to the old-growth sector, where Sitka spruce grew in configurations that seemed deliberately arranged. The trunks formed rough circles, their bases touching, their root systems creating massive upheavals in the forest floor. The bark showed unusual patterns, vertical striations that resembled facial features, not subtle suggestions or pareidolia, actual faces. Mouths open, eyes hollow, expressions of terror preserved in wood. The voices stopped when he entered the grove. Complete silence replaced them, so absolute it felt like pressure against his eardrums. Reeves stood among trees that predated European contact, their canopies lost in perpetual fog. Then he heard the breathing. It came from everywhere, simultaneously, dozens of sources, maybe hundreds, all around him. Shallow inhalations, ragged exhalations, the rhythm identical across every instance. The breathing synchronized, merging into something massive. The sound suggested lungs the size of rooms, respiration that moved tons of air with each cycle. The root systems dominated the grove's center. They rose from the earth in twisted masses, wood fused into organic architecture that created chambers and passages beneath the surface. Something large rested within that network. Reeves could see portions of it through gaps in the roots. Bone, not animal. The structure was wrong proportions that didn't match any known anatomy. He called for his crew. Excavation required careful work. The roots had grown through and around skeletal remains, incorporating them into the tree's structure. What emerged was impossible, yet undeniable. The skeleton measured 12 feet long, humanoid in basic configuration but grotesquely distorted. The ribcage had been stretched laterally, bones elongated and splayed. The skull showed similar distortion, cranium extended backward, jaw unhinged and dropped as if frozen mid-scream. The bones were ancient, wood-hardened, yet they radiated warmth. Inside the ribcage, arranged with deliberate care, were personal items. 46 distinct collections: wallets, photographs, jewelry, camping equipment. Each collection corresponded to a missing person case. Reeves verified them against federal databases. The items were organized chronologically, earliest dates from the 1972nd, most recent from 2018. Whatever created this collection had been active for decades, taking people from the forest and incorporating their belongings into this grotesque display. The tissue samples defied analysis. The bones were carbon dated to approximately 800 years old, yet cellular activity continued. The remains were generating heat, maintaining a temperature 15 degrees above ambient. The biology suggested something that shouldn't exist. Tissue that refused to die completely. Cellular structures preserved through mechanisms no one understood. Reeves set up cameras focused on the excavation site, recording continuously through the 4th night. The footage that survived showed nothing until 2:34 hours. Movement began in the root network, wood shifting as if something beneath was waking. The skeletal remains didn't move, something else emerged alongside them. The camera captured shapes rising from the earth, tall and impossibly thin, covered in moss and lichen. The figures stood maybe 9 feet tall, limbs elongated, body structure suggesting bones without sufficient flesh. The head turned toward the camera, and the footage degraded into static. The crew's emergency radio activated at 2:41. Marcus Reeves's voice, but wrong inflection off, cadence irregular. "It knows your name now." The phrase repeated, identical each time. No variation in delivery. Reeves was in his tent, confirmed by the other technicians. The voice on the radio was his, but he wasn't speaking. They evacuated at first light, abandoning equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The decision wasn't discussed. Everyone simply moved toward the vehicles with silent urgency. The forest felt different. The voices had returned. But now they spoke in the crew members' voices, discussing their equipment, their families, their home addresses. The conversations were specific, personal, containing information no one should possess. The retrieval team arrived 4 days later, authorized to recover the recording equipment and properly document the excavation site. They found the camp intact, equipment still running, batteries somehow maintaining charge. The skeletal remains were gone, no sign of disturbance, no evidence of removal. The root network had closed, wood seamlessly joined as if never excavated. The recording devices were blank, every file erased. Hundreds of hours of audio documentation eliminated, except one file. Audio recorder 3, positioned northeast. The file contained a single phrase repeated 400 times in Marcus Reeves's voice. "It knows your name now." Analysis confirmed the voice pattern matched Reeves exactly. Not an imitation or synthesis, but his actual voice, recorded saying words he'd never spoken. The Bogachil telecommunications station remains unmaintained. Signal disruptions continue. Hikers still enter the valley, most returning with stories of strange audio phenomena, voices in the forest, conversations that follow them, words spoken in their own voices discussing things they haven't done yet. Some don't return. The missing person count has increased. 3 in 2020, 5 in 2021. 7 in 2022. Marcus Reeves left telecommunications entirely. He moved to urban Phoenix, surrounded himself with concrete and artificial light. He sleeps with white noise machines running constantly, volume maxed, drowning out any possibility of hearing voices. Sometimes he wakes to find new audio files on his phone recordings he didn't make, conversations in his voice, discussing people he's never met. The files predict arrivals. She'll reach the coffee shop in 15 minutes, wearing green, carrying a leather bag. And she does. The federal archive containing the Bogachil investigation remains sealed. The documents inside describe something that violates fundamental assumptions about biology, about death, about the boundaries between living tissue and living forest. The bones were old enough to predate European contact, suggesting whatever created them emerged from indigenous traditions and histories now lost. But age doesn't explain the continued activity, the heat generation, the way wood grew through bone while cells refused their final shutdown. In the Bogachil Valley, the old-growth Sitka spruce continue their slow expansion, root systems reaching deeper, claiming more territory. The bark patterns persist, faces frozen in wood, expressions of terminal fear. And the voices remain, broadcasting through frequencies that shouldn't carry human speech, discussing hikers by name, predicting their routes with impossible accuracy. The last entry in Marcus Reeves's field log reads, "The voices aren't recordings. They're not memories. They're something that learned to speak by consuming the people who died here. It took their voices, their knowledge, their identity, and now it uses them to call new arrivals, discussing them with familiar voices, making the forest seem inhabited and safe. But there's only one thing in those trees, and it's still hungry. The equipment remains abandoned. The excavation site remains unmarked. And somewhere in the Bogachil darkness, something tall and skeletal moves between ancient trees, collecting voices, waiting for someone new to hear their name spoken in the voice of someone they trust. The deeper we descend into the archives, the more the patterns emerge, spirals within spirals, 13 voices echoing through hollow ground. This account comes from restricted Forest Service documentation sealed in February 2020, following what internal reports refer to only as the Elwha Convergence. The file contains search and rescue records, thermal imaging data, medical examinations, and testimony from 13 individuals who should not have survived. What follows has been reconstructed from ranger logs, excavation denial forms, and psychiatric evaluations that remain classified. The Elwha Valley keeps its secrets buried deep, but some things claw their way back to the surface. The Elwha Valley stretched grey and infinite beneath February cloud cover, its ridgelines disappearing into mist that had settled thick for 3 days straight. The forest here grew different than other parts of Olympic National Park. Trees leaned inward, creating corridors that seemed to narrow the deeper you walked, and the river's voice carried strangely, echoing off canyon walls that shouldn't produce such sounds. 4 separate hiking groups entered different trails on February 14, 2020, none aware of the others' existence. They carried standard permits, adequate supplies, reasonable experience, 13 people total, spread across 40 square miles of wilderness, connected by nothing except coordinates they'd never shared, and a destination none of them had consciously chosen. Marcus Webb led a group of 3 himself, his brother Julian, and Julian's girlfriend Sarah Chen up the Whiskey Bend Trail, planning a 2-day circuit. The morning felt wrong from the start. Marcus noticed it first in the silence. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, just the wet whisper of their boots on muddy earth and breathing that seemed too loud in the stillness. The trail markers appeared at regular intervals, but Marcus kept checking his GPS, unable to shake the feeling they were walking in circles despite the steady elevation gain. The forest pressed close on both sides, old-growth hemlocks creating permanent twilight even at noon. "Getting dark early," Julian said, though his watch read 1:47 p.m. Sarah stopped, tilting her head. "Do you hear that?" They listened. Beneath the ambient forest sounds dripping water, branch creek, distant river ran something else. A rhythm. Not quite footsteps, more like breathing synchronized with their own, coming from multiple directions at once. Marcus scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. "Just echo effect from the canyon," he said, not believing it. They continued upward. The trail narrowed. Mist thickened into something more substantial than fog, visibility dropping to 20 feet. Marcus checked the GPS again and felt his stomach tighten. According to the device, they'd covered 4 miles. According to the trail markers they'd been passing, they'd covered less than 1. He stopped walking. "We need to turn back." "We just started," Julian protested. "Look at this." Marcus showed him the GPS, the impossible discrepancy. Sarah pulled out her own phone, no signal, but the GPS function still worked. It showed them in a completely different location, half a mile west of where Marcus's device placed them. Both couldn't be right. Neither made sense. That's when they found the first backpack. It sat in the middle of the trail, 20 yards ahead, navy blue with yellow trim. Marcus approached cautiously. The pack was soaked but not old, maybe a few hours in the weather at most. He checked the tags. No name. Inside he found a water bottle, energy bars, a first aid kit, and a trail map with a route highlighted that didn't match any official park trail. The map showed paths that shouldn't exist, connecting points in patterns that formed strange geometry when you traced them with your finger. "Someone dropped this recently," Sarah said. "Should we wait? They might come back." Marcus was already looking ahead, where another pack sat visible through the mist, and beyond that, another. They formed a line leading upward, each pack a different color, different brand, spaced at irregular intervals like breadcrumbs in a nightmare fairy tale. He counted 6 before the mist swallowed the trail. "This isn't right," he whispered. "We need to." The breathing sound intensified. Closer now, coming from the forest on both sides, from ahead and behind simultaneously. Not echo, not wind, something watching them with lungs that moved in perfect rhythm with their own. They ran. The trail twisted. Markers appearing too frequently now. Sometimes 3 in 100 yards. The backpacks continued, forming a spiral pattern Marcus only recognized when they crested a ridge and looked down. Below them, scattered across a clearing, lay dozens of packs, sleeping bags, trekking poles, camping gear, all arranged in a perfect spiral, converging on a structure half consumed by forest growth. A fire lookout tower, its wooden frame collapsed inward, skeletal beams jutting toward gray sky like broken ribs. Marcus's GPS went dead. So did Sarah's. Julian's watch stopped at 3:33 p.m. and wouldn't restart. "We should not go down there," Sarah said, backing away from the ridge edge. But the trail behind them was gone. The forest had closed up, trees standing where clear path had been minutes before. Only one direction remained open downward, toward the tower, toward the spiral of abandoned gear that couldn't possibly all be there, that represented far more hikers than had gone missing in the Elwha Valley's recorded history. They descended because there was no other choice. The clearing felt wrong in a way Marcus couldn't articulate. The ground was too soft, giving beneath their boots like flesh rather than earth. The spiral of gear was precise, mathematical in its arrangement, each item placed with deliberate care. At the center stood the tower's ruins. And through the collapsed walls, Marcus could see papers scattered inside, white against dark wood. "Someone's journal," Julian said, pointing. They approached the tower carefully, stepping over moss-covered beams. The journal lay open on what remained of the floor, pages covered in tight handwriting that spiraled inward like the gear outside. Marcus picked it up, careful of the water-damaged paper. Catherine Mills, Tower 7, November 1967, Day 43. They came again last night. 12, this time. I counted. They walked the ridgeline after sunset. Bodies like shadows stretched vertical, ribs showing through skin gone translucent as tissue paper. I watched them through binoculars until the moonlight hit them right and I could see through them, see the trees behind showing through their chests. But they cast shadows. Dead things don't cast shadows. Marcus flipped forward. The entries grew more frantic. Day 51. Talked to Ranger Dispatch. Told them about the congregation. They think I'm seeing things. Stress from isolation. But I'm not alone up here. They're feeding. Every time someone goes missing, every hunter who never comes back, every hiker who vanishes, they grow more solid, more real. I watched one pick up a stone last night. Actually hold it. They couldn't do that before. Day 58. I understand now. They're not ghosts. They're becoming. They feed on absence. Every empty space where a person should be makes them stronger. They're waiting for enough. 13. The journal says 13 is the number. When 13 are gone, they'll be complete. They'll be real. Day 60. I hear them breathing under the tower. They've learned to sound human. The journal ended there, mid-sentence. The pen dragged across the page in a final stroke. Jesus, Sarah breathed. When did she? The breathing started. It came from beneath them, from the soft earth under the tower's floor. 13 distinct patterns, perfectly synchronized, inhaling and exhaling in unison. The ground trembled with each breath. Run, Marcus said, but they couldn't. Their legs wouldn't move. The air had grown thick, resistant, like moving through water. Around the clearing's edge, figures emerged from the tree line, 12 of them, walking in perfect formation. Their bodies were impossibly thin, skeletal, ribs visible through skin gone gray and translucent. They moved with strange fluidity, joints bending at angles that suggested too many bones or not enough structure. Their faces were elongated, stretched vertical, skin pulled tight over skulls that seemed to extend backward into shadow. And their eyes were mirrors, reflecting Marcus, Julian, and Sarah back at themselves, showing their terror multiplied in dark pupils that swallowed light. The figures formed a circle around the tower. They opened their mouths in unison. and the sound that emerged was wind through hollow spaces, through empty rooms and vacant graves, through the gaps where missing people used to stand. They were speaking words. Marcus realized it with horror, actual words, but in voices that had learned language from absence itself. 13, they whispered. Complete. One of them stepped forward. The leader, maybe, or the first, to achieve enough solidity to interact with the physical world. Its hand reached out, fingers too long, too many joints, and touched the tower's wall. The wood groaned. The figure smiled, stretched lips revealing teeth like broken glass. We were here first, it said in a voice like wind through Catherine Mill's abandoned tower. Before roads, before trails, before names. We walked these ridges when the world was young and cold. But we were thin, barely here. The living passed through us like smoke. Another figure spoke, its voice overlapping the first. Then they started leaving, vanishing, creating gaps, empty spaces in the world. And we learned to feed. A third. Every missing hiker, every lost hunter, every person who never came home. Their absence made us stronger. They moved closer, tightening the circle. The ground beneath the tower trembled harder. Something was rising from below, something that had been waiting 10 feet down in the earth, arranged in a circle, feeding on 60 years of disappearances. We need 12 more, they whispered in unison. 13 total. Perfect circle. Then we'll be complete. Marcus felt it then, the pull, like gravity reversed, like the earth trying to swallow him downward. His boots sank into the soft ground. Beside him, Julian and Sarah were sinking too. The earth opening beneath them, drawing them down toward whatever waited in that circle 10 feet below. The figures stepped closer still. The leader's face pressed forward, elongated skull tilting, mirror eyes reflecting Marcus's terrified face back at him, distorted and multiplied. Its breath smelled like old wood and older earth. You'll join the others, it whispered. You'll wait below, and when you emerge, you'll be changed, marked, ours. And you won't remember, not consciously, but you'll dream us. You'll see what we see. You'll know what's coming. The ground swallowed them. Marcus fell through darkness that pressed against his skin, through earth that moved like living tissue, through cold that burned. He heard Sarah screaming, Julian crying out, and 9 other voices he didn't recognize, other hikers, other groups, all falling together toward the circle where the starving congregation waited to feed on their absence. Time stopped meaning anything. The excavation request was denied on February 19, 2020. Park administration cited environmental concerns, structural instability, and lack of probable cause. The thermal signatures remained visible on imaging for 72 hours, then vanished. On March 8th, rangers stationed at Whiskey Bend reported 13 individuals walking in perfect formation out of the forest toward their station. Medical examination documented severe malnutrition, dehydration, consistent with 3 weeks without food or water. Each individual bore identical scarring on their backs, symbols carved deep into flesh, still healing, that older Forest Service records matched to pictographs found in Catherine Mill's journal. None retained conscious memory of their disappearance. All reported the same recurring dream. In the dream, they stand in Tower 7, fully restored, looking down at themselves, hiking the trails below. Behind them stands something ancient and skeletal, impossibly thin, its elongated face pressed close to their ears. It whispers their futures, in a voice like wind through hollow trees, futures where they return to the Elwha Valley, where they bring others, where the congregation grows strong enough to walk in daylight without fading. In the dream, they see its face clearly, stretched skin over too many bones, mirror eyes reflecting their terror back infinitely, a smile that shows teeth like broken glass. And in the dream, it's always feeding. The Elwha Valley remains open to hikers. Tower 7's location is marked on internal Forest Service maps with a notation: excavation prohibited. Do not investigate foundation. Report any thermal anomalies immediately. The spiral of abandoned gear was removed, and stored in evidence. Though inventory records note the impossibility of the collection items dating back to 1952, decades before the tower was decommissioned. On quiet February nights, rangers report synchronized breathing sounds from the ridgeline. 13 distinct patterns, perfectly matched, growing stronger each year. The congregation is patient. They have learned to wait. And with every hiker who goes missing, every absence carved into the valley's history, they grow more real. 13 was only the beginning. The files go silent now. What remains is what could not be spoken until tonight. The final account comes from Olympic National Park, Washington, December 2021. A classified incident report filed by Ranger Jason Wu during what should have been routine off-season monitoring of Hurricane Ridge. The document was sealed by the National Park Service 3 days after submission, cross-referenced with missing persons cases dating back 40 years, and buried in archives marked for indefinite restriction. What follows is reconstructed from Wu's body camera footage, dispatch recordings, and meteorological data logged during a 72-hour period when Hurricane Ridge ceased to obey natural law. The mountain kept its own records, and it remembered every soul it had claimed. The road to Hurricane Ridge wound through 17 miles of winter silence, switchbacks carved into slopes where fog pooled like standing water. Ranger Jason Wu drove alone through the pre-dawn darkness of December 18th, windshield wipers cutting paths through freezing mist that refused to clear. His dashboard radio crackled with static, no dispatch, no weather updates, just white noise that rose and fell like breathing. The park had been closed to public access for 3 weeks, snowpack too unstable for safe passage, but Dr. Sarah Vance had secured special permission for solo meteorological research at the Summit Visitor Center. She'd been up there 6 days. Her last check-in was 48 hours overdue. Wu's headlights caught something at mile marker 14, where the road bent sharply around an outcropping of ancient rock. He slowed, then stopped. His body camera activated automatically as he stepped from the truck into air so cold it burned his throat. The fog pressed close, thick enough to muffle sound, and through it he saw what had triggered his instincts. Winter gear scattered across the roadway in deliberate arrangement. A parka, insulated pants, gloves, boots, all positioned to form an arrow pointing upward toward the summit still hidden in cloud cover 3 miles above. The gear was frost-covered but intact. Wu's gloved hands turned over the parka, found the Park Service tag stitched inside. Dr. Sarah Vance. Issue date, December 12th, 2021. He spoke into his radio, voice steady despite the wrongness settling into his chest. Dispatch, this is Wu. I've got abandoned equipment on Hurricane Ridge Road, registered to our research permit holder. Proceeding to Summit for welfare check. Static answered him, the kind that felt deliberate, as if something were listening through the interference. He left the gear where it lay evidence in a scene he didn't yet understand and continued upward. The fog grew denser with altitude, pressing against the truck windows, and Wu noticed the temperature gauge on his dashboard climbing instead of falling. 42 degrees at 5,000 feet, 51 at 6,000. Impossible. He'd worked these mountains for 8 years. Winter at this elevation meant sub-zero cold, wind that could strip flesh from bone, but his breath no longer formed clouds, and sweat gathered beneath his thermal layers. The Hurricane Ridge Visitor Center materialized from the fog like a ship breaking through storm clouds, a low, modern structure of glass and timber designed to showcase the Olympic mountain range. But every window was obscured, covered from inside with patterns that looked like frost. Wu parked in the empty lot, boots crunching on snow that felt wrong underfoot, too soft, too warm. His body camera recorded his approach to the building's main entrance. The doors were unlocked. Inside, the air was colder than outside, breath visible again, and he understood immediately why he couldn't see through the windows. They weren't covered with frost. They were covered with handprints. Hundreds of them, pressed outward against the glass from inside, overlapping in layers so dense they formed a solid barrier. The prints varied in size, large adult hands, smaller ones, children's palms. all pressed with enough force to leave condensation halos around each point of contact. Wu's camera captured him moving along the window line, counting. More than 300 individual prints on the eastern wall alone, none pressed inward, all reaching out, as if trying to escape. He found Dr. Sarah Vance on the observation deck, the building's highest point, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that should have offered panoramic views of the Olympic range. She sat in one of the visitor chairs, facing the mountains invisible beyond the handprint-covered glass, and Wu knew she was dead before he touched her. Her skin was blue-white, eyes open, body rigid in a posture of perfect attention. Except her eyes moved, followed him as he approached, tracked his movement with slow, deliberate precision, while the rest of her remained frozen solid. Wu's training took over: check for vitals, assess scene safety, preserve evidence. His fingers found her wrist, felt nothing. No pulse, no warmth. Her skin was ice against his glove, but those eyes kept moving, watching him with an expression he couldn't name. Not fear, not pain, something closer to warning. Her notebook lay open on the armrest beside her, pages covered in precise handwriting that grew increasingly erratic toward the end. Wu's camera recorded the entries as he flipped through them. December 14th, 10:47 p.m. Temperature fluctuation outside normal parameters. Digital thermometer reads 67 degrees Fahrenheit at 5,242 feet. Impossible. Wind carrying sounds, not animal, not mechanical. Voices, counting in the darkness. December 15th, 2:33 a.m. They're ascending. Can see them through thermal camera. Heat signatures climbing from the valley, but nothing visible to naked eye. 37 distinct sources. Moving in formation, all converging on this location. December 16th, 11:54 p.m. The summit congregation has arrived. They're not trying to enter, they're remembering. Each one built from ice and fog, translucent in moonlight. Faces recognizable from the missing persons files I researched. Thomas Chen, lost 1,997. Rebecca Martinez, last seen 2003. David Park, vanished 2010. 40 years of mountain claims, all standing outside, all pressing hands to the glass. They're breathing on the windows. The condensation forms words. Wu looked up from the notebook to the covered windows, moved closer to one panel where the handprints were less dense, where he could see between the overlapping impressions. The condensation wasn't random. Letters formed in the misted glass, spelled out in breath fog by invisible mouths. Names. He recognized some recent hikers, people reported missing in the past year. Others were strangers. Beside each name, a date. All in the future. All within the next 6 months. His own name was there. Jason Wu. March 3rd, 2022. The temperature in the observation deck dropped 15 degrees in seconds. Wu's breath came in clouds so thick they obscured his vision. He returned to Vance's body, tried to lift her, get her to the truck, call for emergency extraction. But she wouldn't move. Frozen to the chair at molecular level, immovable as bedrock. He checked her body temperature with an infrared thermometer, 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Exactly. Tried wrapping her in his jacket, directing his body heat toward her. The reading didn't change. Her eyes continued their slow tracking, watching him struggle, and he realized she was trying to tell him something. Look. Her gaze shifted deliberately toward the windows. Look outside. Wu approached the glass, pressed his face close to a gap between handprints. The fog had cleared. Dawn was breaking over the Olympic range, pale light spilling across snowfields that stretched toward Mount Olympus in the distance. And standing in the parking lot, arranged in perfect rows, were dozens of figures. They looked human-shaped, but built from ice and condensation, bodies translucent and shimmering in the early light. Each one perfectly still, faces visible but not quite right, features recognizable but slightly wrong, as if remembered rather than real. They all faced the visitor center. All stood at attention like soldiers awaiting orders. Wu's hand went to his radio. Dispatch. This is Wu at Hurricane Ridge. I need immediate backup. Multiple. I need backup now. The static answered, but this time words formed beneath the noise. Not his dispatcher. Voices layered over voices, counting in unison. 38, 39, 40. The numbers climbed as Wu watched more figures materialize from the tree line, ascending from the valley in broad daylight, adding themselves to the congregation that surrounded the building. He documented everything. Camera running, he moved through the visitor center, cataloging evidence. The handprints on every window, Vance's frozen body with its moving eyes, the notebook entries describing impossible phenomena. Outside, the ice figures stood motionless, and Wu understood with sick certainty that they were waiting, not for him to leave, for him to join them. His name was already written in condensation, his date already recorded. The standoff lasted 3 days. Wu remained inside the visitor center, unwilling to step into the parking lot where the congregation waited. He tried breaking through the windows on the building's north side, found they wouldn't shatter glass that should have been fragile had become impervious, reinforced by some property of the cold that defied physics. The figures outside didn't move, didn't melt when sunlight hit them, didn't react to his presence. They simply stood, watching, breathing against the glass whenever he approached, adding more names to the growing list of condensation-written predictions. Backup never came. Every radio call dissolved into static and counting voices. On the morning of the third day, December 21st, clouds rolled in from the Pacific, massive storm systems that darkened the sky and began dumping snow at a rate Wu had never witnessed. 3 feet in 2 hours, 5 feet by evening. The building groaned under accumulating weight. The figures outside disappeared beneath rising drifts. Buried but somehow still present, Wu could feel them beneath the snow, still standing, still waiting. When the storm cleared on December 23rd, the snowpack had reached 12 feet. The visitor center was nearly buried. Wu had rationed his supplies, melted snow for water, kept his camera running to document his survival. He returned to the observation deck to check Vance's condition, found the chair empty. Her body was gone. No tracks in the undisturbed snow around the building, no signs of forced entry or exit, just absence where she had been. Her notebook remained. Open to a new entry written in handwriting Wu recognized as hers but couldn't have been. The pages had been blank when he'd last checked hours before. The entry contained coordinates, his home address in Port Angeles, 40 miles away, and beneath it, a date, December 24th, 2021. Tomorrow. Wu's camera recorded him reading the entry 3 times, hands shaking, before he made his decision. He gathered what gear he could carry, checked the parking lot through the handprint-covered windows. The snow had obliterated the figures, buried them completely. No movement visible outside. Dawn was breaking again, pale winter light making the snowfields glow. He forced open the main entrance, prepared to dig his way to the truck, to descend before the prediction in Vance's notebook could manifest. The parking lot was clear. Not just clear of snow, clear of everything. The asphalt was bare and dry, his truck sitting exactly where he'd left it 3 days before, untouched. No ice figures, no handprints visible from outside the building's windows. Temperature was -4 degrees, normal for December at this elevation. Wu's breath formed normal clouds. The world had reset itself, erased the impossible. But when he turned to look back at the visitor center, he saw them, pressed against the glass from inside now. Hundreds of translucent figures filling the observation deck, hands pressed outward, breath condensing on the windows. And among them, perfectly still, eyes tracking his movement, was Dr. Sarah Vance. She lifted one frozen hand and pressed it against the glass, adding her handprint to the collection. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear but understood completely. March 3rd. The National Park Service sealed the Hurricane Ridge Visitor Center indefinitely. Official reason: structural damage from winter storms. The building remains standing, windows still intact, but no personnel are permitted inside. Ranger Jason Wu, transferred to Mount Rainier National Park on January 15, 2022. His resignation was effective March 2nd. On March 3rd, hikers reported finding winter gear arranged in an arrow formation on the Skyline Trail, pointing toward Paradise Visitor Center at Rainier's summit. The gear belonged to Wu. His body was never recovered. Dr. Sarah Vance's research was classified and her meteorological data expunged from official records. But on certain winter nights, when fog settles over Hurricane Ridge, maintenance crews report seeing lights in the observation deck and handprints appearing on glass that no one has touched in years. The mountain keeps its congregation, and the summit never forgets what it's owed.